Hello children. In this video lecture, I'll explain you chapter 2 of Snapshots. Chapter 2, the address written by Marga Minko. Let's know about the author. Marga Minko is a pen name of Sarah Menko, born on 31st March 1920. She is a Dutch journalist and writer. Her real surname was Menko, but an official accidentally switched the first vowel, and Marga Minko grew up in a family of 5 in Breda. Unlike her sister, brother, and parents, she went into hiding during World War II. Marga Minko is the only member of her immediate family to have survived the Second World War. The address by Marga Minko narrates the story of a lady, possibly here the author herself, who, after losing her entire family in the Holocaust, returns to the address in order to collect all her family's possessions that the author's mother had left with Mrs. Darling, a new non-Jewish lady. Before leaving her homeland, but unfortunately she was not able to collect all that belongings. Let's take quick review of the outline of the chapter. The address by Marga Minko throws light on a multitude of human emotions. This story is a touching account of a girl who goes in search of her mother's belongings after the Second World War in Holland. On her first visit to 46 Marconi Street, Mrs. Darling's house, the author was given a cold shoulder by Mrs. Darling. This act of Mrs. Darling is enough to tell us that the author's mother was betrayed by Mrs. Darling. But even after finding what she so much wanted to touch, to see, to feel, and remember, but she leaves everything behind as it could not bring her dead mother back. She decides to move on and live with only memories of the former times. The dress that held so much importance till she visited the place lost its value, and the girl realized that it could get her nothing but pain. Let's know about the characters. 4 characters are here in this chapter. First one is the daughter. She is the narrator who returns to Holland to go to the address where her mother's precious belongings were kept. As normalcy had returned after the Second World War in Holland, she wanted to see all possessions that were a bond between her family and herself. Second character is Mrs. S, the narrator's mother in the story. The narrator's mother has been called as Mrs. S. She was a simpleton who could not see the manipulating and fraudulent nature of Mrs. Darling, her acquaintance. She trusted Mrs. Darling and allowed her to keep all her precious belongings for the time being. Third character, Mrs. Darling. She has been described as an old acquaintance of Mrs. S. After a long gap, she appeared again during the war. She possessed a cunning personality. She is most reluctant to recognize the daughter and does not allow her to enter the house. Last character, fourth, Mrs. Darling's daughter. A 15-year-old girl was not as her mother. She politely asked the author to come in. She made her feel comfortable, also offered her tea and showed the house to her. Let's start an explanation of the chapter. This short story is a poignant account of a daughter who goes in search of her mother's belongings after the war in Holland. When she finds them, the objects evoke memories of her earlier life. However, she decides to leave them all behind and resolves to move on. Narrator of the story is a woman who is daughter of Mrs. S. After the World War was over, she had gone to her hometown to meet Mrs. Darling. Before World War, Mrs. Darling used to come to their house. The narrator had gone to meet Mrs. Darling to collect belongings of her mother, but she refused to recognize, and then daughter decided to move on and forget about all that things. "Do you still know me?" I asked. The woman looked at me searchingly. She had opened the door a chink. I came closer and stood on the step. "No, I don't know you. I am Mrs. S.'s daughter." The narrator asked the woman if she knew her. The woman looked at the author carefully. She did not open the door fully. It was opened only slightly. The author came near the door and stood on the step. The lady told the daughter that she did not know her. The narrator told her that she was daughter of Mrs. S. She held her hand on the door as though she wanted to prevent it opening any further. Her face gave absolutely no sign of recognition. She kept staring at me in silence. The lady had put her hand on the door. It seemed to the narrator that she did not want to open the door anymore. From her face, the narrator understood that she did not recognize her. Instead, the lady continued to stare at the author. Perhaps I was mistaken, I thought. Perhaps it is not her. I had seen her only once, fleetingly, and that was years ago. It was most probable that I had rung the wrong bell. The woman let go of the door and stepped to the side. She was wearing my mother's green knitted cardigan. The wooden buttons were rather pale from washing. She saw that I was looking at the cardigan and half hid herself again behind the door. But I knew now that I was right. The narrator thought that probably she had made a mistake. Probably that house was not the house of Mrs. Darling. She had seen her only once, and that too for a short time only. Most probably, the author thought that she had come to the wrong house. The woman removed her hand from the door to open it. She moved it to the side of the door. She was wearing a green sweater that was knitted by the author's mother. The wooden button of the sweater had become yellowish because of washing off it. The woman realized that she was looking at the sweater, so she partially hid herself behind the door. The author understood that she was right. The sweater belonged to her mother only. "Well, you knew my mother?" I asked. "Have you come back?" said the woman. I thought that no one had come back, only me. The narrator asked the lady if she knew the narrator's mother. The woman asked if the author and her family had come back. She thought that no one had come back. The author had replied that only she had come back. A door opened and closed in the passage behind her. A musty smell emerged. I regret I cannot do anything for you. I have come here specially on the train. I wanted to talk to you for a moment. It is not convenient for me now, said the woman. I can't see you another time. In the passage behind the woman, a door opened and again closed. A stale smell came from the passage. The woman said that she was sorry that she could not do anything for her. The author replied her that she had come there by train for a specific purpose. The author wanted to talk to the lady for some time, but the lady replied that it was not convenient for her to talk to the author at that time. She asked the author to come some other time. She nodded and cautiously closed the door as though no one inside the house should be disturbed. I stood where I was on the step. The curtain in front of the bay window moved. Someone stared at me and would then have asked what I wanted. Oh, nothing. The woman would have said it was nothing. The lady moved her head and carefully closed the door. It appeared that she did not want to disturb anybody in the house. The author was still standing on the steps of the house. A curtain in front of the bay window was moved. Someone stared at the author from the window. The lady would have asked her what she wanted, and the lady who was standing at the door would have replied on behalf of her, the author, that she would have said that she did not want to meet anybody. This is only imagination of the author, children. She thought that after closing the door, the lady was looking her from that window, and from that window she imagined that she was asking her what she wanted, and she imagined herself that that lady replied that she did not want to meet anybody. I looked at the nameplate again. Dawdling, it said, in black letters on white enamel, and on the jamb, a bit higher, the number 46. As the author was imagining and thinking about the dialogues, what the lady would ask her, because she was for a few moments, she was standing on that doorstep, then author was very sad because that lady, first of all, she had not recognized her, and then she said that she had no time to talk to her. So as she was at the right address, to check that, the author looked at the nameplate on the house, and dawdling was written on the nameplate. Little higher on the frame of the door, number of the house of return, number 46. Here, narrator wanted to say that she had come to the correct house, but that lady, she did not wish to meet the author, or she did not want to talk anymore with her. As I walked slowly back to the station, I thought about my mother, who had given me the address years ago. It had been in the first half of the war. I was home for a few days, and it struck me immediately that something or other about the rooms had changed. I missed various things. My mother was surprised. I should have noticed so quickly. Then she told me about Mrs. Darling. I had never heard of her, but apparently she was an old acquaintance of my mother, whom she had not seen for years. She had suddenly turned up and renewed their contact. Since then, she had come regularly. While slowly walking back to the station, the author thought about her mother. She had given her this address. It was during the first half of the World War. The author had come to her home only for some days. When she came back, she had seen some changes in her house. It immediately understood that something had changed in the rooms of the house. The author had found many things were missing. Her mother commented that she had noticed so quickly all the changes. Then the author's mother told her about Mrs. Darling. The author had never heard about her. The author thought that probably she was known to her mother since long time. But her mother had not met Mrs. Darling since many years. Mrs. Darling had come back unexpectedly and she had renewed her friendship with the author's mother. Then Mrs. Darling started coming to the author's house frequently. Every time she leaves here, she takes something home with her, said my mother. She took all the table silver in one go and then the antique plates that huge there. She had trouble lugging those large vases, and I'm worried she got a crick in her back from the crockery. My mother shook her head pityingly. I would never have dared ask her. She suggested it to me herself. She even insisted. She wanted to save all my nice things. If we have to leave here, we shall lose everything, she says. The author's mother told her that whenever Mrs. Darling visited her house, she took something from their house to her house. At one time, she took all the silver utensils from the dining table. Then she took their very old plates that they were hanging on the wall. Mrs. Darling had lot of trouble in carrying the large utensils to her house. At that moment, the author's mother worried that Mrs. Darling got a sprain in her back while carrying crockery. The author's mother shook her head with lot of pity towards Mrs. Darling. The author's mother had not asked Mrs. Darling to take things from their house. Mrs. Darling had made that suggestion to the author's mother that she wanted to take away every nice thing from the author's house. Mrs. Darling told her mother that if the author's mother had to leave the house, her mother would lose everything. Have you agreed with her that she should keep everything? I asked. As if that's necessary, my mother cried. It would simply be an insult to talk like that and think about the risk she is running each time she goes out of door with a full suitcase or bag. The author had asked her mother if she had agreed that Mrs. Darling could keep everything of their house. The author's mother cried and told her that it was not necessary. It would have been an insult to talk in that manner. Mrs. Darling was taking lot of risk while taking things from their house. She took things in a bag or in a suitcase. My mother seemed to notice that I was not entirely convinced. She looked at me reprovingly, and after that, we spoke no more about it. Meanwhile, I had arrived at the station without having paid much attention to things on the way. I was walking in familiar places again for the first time since the war, but I did not want to go further than was necessary. I did not want to upset myself with the sight of streets and houses full of memories from a precious time. The author's mother realized that she was not fully convinced by her line of thought. Her mother looked at her as if to scold her mildly. After that, she did not talk about that matter with her mother. By that time, the author had reached the station. She did not pay any attention to things along the way. After the World War, for the first time, she was walking in that place which was familiar to her. But she did not want to know about it more than required. She had memory about every street, house, and the precious time she had spent in that village. She did not want to recall those and upset herself. In the train back, I saw Mrs. Darling in front of me again as I had the first time I met her. It was the morning after the day my mother had told me about her. I had got up late and coming downstairs, I saw my mother about to see someone out, a woman with a broad back. There is my daughter, said my mother. She beckoned to me. The woman nodded and picked up the suitcase under the coat rack. She wore a brown coat and a shapeless hat. Does she live far away? I asked, seeing the difficulty she had going out of the house with the heavy case. In Marconi Street, said my mother, number 46. Remember that. In the train, she imagined Mrs. Darling sitting in front of her. She looked exactly same as she had seen her, Mrs. Darling, on the first day. The author's mother had told her about Mrs. Darling. Mrs. Darling had come to the next day. That day she had got up late and was coming down the stairs of her house. She had seen that her mother was about to see off someone. She was a thick woman. The author's mother The author's mother signaled towards the author and said to Mrs. Darling that she means that author was her daughter. The woman nodded. She picked up the suitcase and the hanger of her coat. She was wearing a brown coat and a hat that did not have proper shape. The author asked her mother if Mrs. Darling lived at a distance that far from their house. The author asked that question because she was having difficulty in carrying the heavy suitcase. The author's mother replied that Mrs. Darling lived at number 46 in Marconi Street. She even advised the author to remember the address. I had remembered it, but I had waited a long time to go there. Initially, after the liberation, I was absolutely not interested in all that stored stuff, and naturally, I was also rather afraid of it. Afraid of being confronted with things that I had belonged to a connection that no longer existed, which were hidden away in cupboards and boxes and waiting in vain until they were put back in their place again, which had endured all those years because they were things. The author had remembered the address, but she did not go there earlier. After end of the World War One, was certainly not interested in the things that were taken away and stored by Mrs. Darling. Actually, she was afraid to look at those things. The author shares her feeling with us, with readers, that she was afraid to see things that would remind her of her mother. She had tried out to recall memories of father too often. Presently, the things of her mother's memory were hidden in cupboards, in boxes, and when these things were yet to be taken out from the boxes, she had not taken this out. Those things she wished and wanted to put back at their original place. These had tolerated their neglect because these were things. But gradually everything became more normal again. Bread was getting to be a lighter color. There was a bed you could sleep in unthreatened, a room with a view you were more used to glancing at each day. And one day I noticed I was curious about all the possessions that must still be at that address. I wanted to see them, touch, remember. Slowly everything once again became normal. Quality of food and quality of life improved. They could sleep in their houses without any danger. The view out of their house became familiar, meaning that instances of destruction had reduced. One day, the author realized that she was eager about all those things that must be at the address of her mother. She wanted to touch, see, and recall all those things. After my first visit in vain Mrs. Darling's house, I decided to try a second time. Now a girl of about 15 opened the door to me. I asked her if her mother was at home. No, she said. My mother's doing an errand. No matter, I said. I will wait for her. The author's first visit to the house of Mrs. Darling was unsuccessful. She could not see any of those things. So the author decided to make a second attempt. That time, a girl of about 15 years old opened the door for her. The author asked her if her mother was at home. The girl replied that her mother had gone out of the house for a short time. The author said that she would wait for Mrs. Darling to return. I followed the girl along the passage. An old fashioned iron Hanukkah candle holder hung next to a mirror. We never used it because it was much more cumbersome than a single candlestick. The author went behind the girl along the passage of the house. A candle holder of very old Hanukkah type was hanging near the mirror. The author and her family had never used it in their home. It was more difficult to light the candle stand than a single candle. Won't you sit down? Asked the girl. She had opened the door of the living room and I went inside past her. I stopped horrified. I was in a room I knew and did not know. I found myself in the midst of the things I did not want to see again, but which oppressed me in the strange atmosphere or because of the tasteless way everything was arranged. Because of the ugly furniture, of the muggy smell that hung there, I don't want, but I scarcely dared to look around me. The girl moved a chair. I sat down and stared at the woolen tablecloth. I rubbed it. My fingers grew warm from rubbing. I followed the lines of the pattern. Somewhere on the edge there should be a burn mark that had never been repaired. My mother will be back soon, said the girl. I have already made tea for her. Will you have a cup? Thank you. The girl asked the author to sit down. She had opened the door of the living room. The author went inside the room ahead of her. The author suddenly stopped, as she was shocked. The room looked familiar to her, and she did not know about that room. Means, author wanted to say that the room was different, but the things in the room were familiar to her. The things around the author were so familiar to her. She was in the middle of the things she did not want to see. Those things troubled her a lot in an unusual manner. Or we can say she was uncomfortable because things were not arranged to her. The author's liking, or because of ugly furniture, or because of unpleasant smell in the house. But she did not have the courage to look around the house. The girl asked her to sit on a chair, and the author sat. She looked at the woolen tablecloth spread on the table. She moved her fingers on it. Her fingers grew warm. The author had recognized that it was their tablecloth. She felt that warmth of memory. Her hand moved along the design made on the tablecloth. She remembered that at the edge of the tablecloth there was a mark of a burn. That burn mark was not repaired. The girl said that her mother would come back soon. She told that she had already made tea for herself. She asked the author if she would like to have some tea. The author thanked her and agreed to have tea. I looked up. The girl put cups ready on the tea table. She had a broad back just like her mother. She poured tea from a white pot. All it had was a gold border on the lid. I remembered. She opened a box and took some spoons out. That's a nice box. I heard my own voice. It was a strange voice, as though its sound was different in this room. The author looked in front of her and towards the girl. She had already put some cups on the tea table. Just like her mother, she was a slightly thick person. She poured tea into teacups from a white teapot. The teapot had a golden border on its lid. The author recalled it was theirs. Then that girl opened a box and took out some spoons. The author said that it was a nice box. The author's voice sounded peculiar, strange to herself. It appeared as if the voice was coming from another room. Oh, you know about them? She had turned round and brought me my tea. She laughed. My mother says it is antique. We have got lots more. She pointed round the room. See for yourself. I had no need to follow her hand. I knew which thing she meant. I just looked at the still life over the tea table. As a child, I had always fancied the apple on the pewter plate. The girl asked the author if she knew about those cutlery. The girl turned her face towards the author and brought tea. She told that her mother had informed that those cutlery were antique pieces. They had many more such pieces. Even she offered the author to have a look at those. She did not need to look in the direction her hand was pointing to. She knew about which things she was talking about. She looked at the tea table. A pewter plate was lying on the tea table. During the author's childhood, she liked to eat an apple in that place. We use it for everything, she said. Once we even ate off the plates hanging there on the wall. I wanted to so much, but it was not anything special. I had found the burn mark on the tablecloth. The girl looked questioningly at me. The girl said that they used all the cutlery that could be seen. Once they ate in the plates that are hanging on the wall. The author was even very eager to eat in those plates. But she did not find anything special in those plates. The author had located the burn mark on the tablecloth. The girl looked at the author as if she wanted to ask a question. Yes, I said, you get so used to touching all these lovely things in the house. You hardly look at them anymore. You only notice when something is missing because it has to be repaired or because you have lent it, for example. The author told her that they get used to touching every lovely things of their own house. Hence, one would not notice any difference. One or they would notice those things and its importance when those things were not with them. For example, if those were to be repaired or have been given to somebody or someone else. Again, I heard the unnatural sound of my voice and I went on. I remember my mother once asked me if I would help her polish the silver. It was a very long time ago and I was probably bored that day, or perhaps I had to stay at home because I was ill, as she had never asked me before. I asked her which silver she meant, and she replied, surprised, that it was the spoons, forks, and knives, of course. And that was the strange thing. I did not know. The cutlery we ate of every day was silver. Once again, voice of narrator was unnatural because she was trying to remember her old days. She said that once her mother had asked her to help her in cleaning silver utensils of their house. It was long ago from that time. Either she was getting bored on that day or she had not gone to school because she was sick. The author's mother had never asked her to do that work prior of that day. The author asked her mother which silver utensils the mother wanted her to clean. The author was surprised when her mother told her to clean spoon, forks and knives. The author found it very strange because she did not know that those cutlery of daily use were made of silver. The girl laughed again. I bet you don't know it is either. I looked intently at her. What we eat with? She asked. Well, do you know? She hesitated. She walked to the sideboard and wanted to open a drawer. I will look. It is in here. I jumped up. I was forgetting the time. I must catch my train. She had her hand on the drawer. Don't you want to wait for my mother? No, I must go. I walked to the door. The girl pulled the drawer open. I can find my own way. As I walked down the passage, I heard the jingling of spoons and forks. The girl again laughed. The author told the girl that probably she also did not know about it. The author gazed at her. The girl asked if the author knew about the cutlery they were using daily. The author again asked her if the girl knew about those pieces. The girl hesitated for a moment. Then the girl walked to the shelf kept in the room and opened a drawer. The girl said the author that if she wished, she would look at those pieces. They all were in that drawer. Suddenly, the author got up. The author said that she had forgotten about the time. It was time to catch her train. The girl had placed her hand on the drawer. She asked the author if she wanted to wait till her mother come back. The author told her that it was necessary for her to go. Saying that, the author walked to the door. The author had told the girl that she would go alone. She need not see the author off from her house. In the meanwhile, the girl had pulled the drawer. As the author walked through the passage of house, she could hear the metallic sound of forks and spoons. At the corner of the road, I looked up at the nameplate, Marconi Street, it said. I had been at number 46. The address was correct. But now I did not want to remember it anymore. I would not go back there because the objects that are linked in your memory with the familiar life of former times instantly lost their value when served from them. You see them again in the strange surroundings. And what should I have done with them in a small rented room where the shreds of black out paper still hung along the windows and no more than a handful of cutlery fitted in the narrow table drawer? I resolved to forget the address. Of all the things I had to forget, that would be the easiest. At the turn of the road, the author looked up at the signboard. It read Marconi Street. The author had gone to the house number 46. The address given by her mother was correct, but the author did not want to remember it now at the time. Author wanted to forget about every memory of the past. The author did not want to go there once again. Then further she thought that because memory of past life immediate loses its value when a person moved away from those things. After that, the person looked at those things in a different perspective, and those cutlery were of no use to her. The author was presently living in a small room she had taken on rent. She had put pieces of black papers on windows as curtains. The drawer of her table was very small. It could accommodate only small quantity of cutlery. The author decided to forget the address. This should be the easiest thing for the author to forget. Author did not want to live in her past. She wanted to forget about it. It was a powerful message indeed. Children, now in further slides you will get question answers of the chapter. Learn well and write it down in your notebook. Prepare it very well for your upcoming exams. Thank you.